Hello everybody, welcome back to Findmypast from home. Delighted to have you with us today. It is December, so it means I can be extra and I can have Christmas lights. And we're also having a really special Christmas session today. I'm not alone for this. I'll welcome him into the stream in a moment, but please make yourselves comfortable. I hope you're wearing Christmas jumpers. I didn't wear a Christmas jumper. I've gone with sparkly Christmas top instead. You can't really see it, but it is sparkly. I hope you've got your Christmas beverage of choice, or a mince pie, or a slice of cake, or something along those lines. It's going to be really, really fun today. We're going to be talking about Christmas in modern Britain, and we're actually going to start off by talking about what Christmas was like for your ancestors in 1921 to really set the scene. Because if you have been living under a rock, the 1921 census of England and Wales is coming to Findmypast on the 6th of January 2022, and we are so excited to bring you this incredible record collection. We talk about it so much, but it's just because we are so excited for you all to see it and for you to make some. I think some of them will be life-changing discoveries, actually. But yes, let me welcome in my guest. Now, this is a returning guest, Martin Johns of Swansea University. Welcome back, Martin.
Hello, I'm feeling slightly underdressed. I should have put on a Christmas jumper.
Not at all. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Lovely. And for anybody that didn't catch your last session with us when we looked at the Welsh language in family history records, could you just introduce yourself briefly to our lovely community?
So I'm a professor of history at Swansea University, and I'm interested in two things. There's two elements to my work. One is modern Wales and how Welsh society works and what Welsh identity is, but I'm also interested in the history of popular culture, what people did for fun. And that means I've kind of looked at the history of sport, the history of music, and the history of Christmas, and using Christmas almost as a window, saying you can look through the window of Christmas and learn something, understand something about the society in which it took place. So I've been using Christmas as a way of understanding British society, really.
Fantastic. I've just been asked to turn off the flashing, so the lights have gone because they're only on one setting, I'm afraid. But you had them for the beginning, and I'm still in my sparkly top, so that's fine. Let's welcome some people in the comments. We have Daphne with us. We have Sally saying she got the booster yesterday, feeling grim. Oh, I hope you feel better, Sally. I can't wait to get my booster. To get that. We've got Linda. We have Elaine. We have Andrea, who is making Christmas cards. My auntie also makes Christmas cards. I think it's really therapeutic as well, which is good. We have Jenny. Oh, and also, yes, Jessie is in the comments with us today, everybody. So please do say hi to Jessie. Yeah, lots of people in today. This is fantastic. I hope you're all well. So as I said, what we're going to be chatting about is, and this is what happens when I take them off. They're just here now with me. We're going to be talking about Christmas in modern Britain, but we're going to start off by Martin has actually kindly prepared some slides and is going to talk about what Christmas was like for your ancestors in 1921 to set the scene a bit. So have a think. You know, we have Christmases how we have them now. We have certain traditions. We have certain things we do every year. It's almost like clockwork, isn't it? Like for me, it's things like we have our Christmas lunch at lunchtime, and then we have sort of a picky tea. That's what we call it. We have a picky tea on Christmas Day in the evening. These are the kind of things my family do, but you all have your own traditions. Where did they come from, basically? That's what we're going to be chatting about. So yes, please do add in any questions that you have for Martin into the comments, and I will pass over to Martin now to set the scene, to take us back to 1921.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to try and illustrate what Christmas was like in 1921 using some extracts from newspapers, which I've selected from the British Newspaper Archive, which is part of the Findmypast package. And to be honest, we'd recognise an awful lot about Christmas in 1921. The modern festival was really invented in some ways by the Victorians, and so many of our traditions, so many of our practices, things that we do at Christmas time, date back to the Victorian period. So by 1921, Christmas was really well established within British culture. It was something that everybody knew. People knew the stories. There were established traditions. But it was also sometimes a period, a time of sadness, and a time of some tensions as well. And 1921, 100 years ago, is a period when the First World War has obviously just finished, but new political tensions are emerging within Britain. Class tensions are starting to emerge. The Russian Revolution is just 4 years ago. And those things are casting a shadow over British society. But Christmas undoubtedly was incredibly commercial in this period. Here's a slide, here's a page from the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News. And it's giving you ideas of things that you can buy for presents. But there's one interesting thing here, because I think it illustrates how people often felt pressurized into spending. And the commercial Christmas was something really pushed by advertising and pushed by shops. And one thing it says here is, Happy Christmas. If there's one thing certain in this most uncertain of worlds, it's that the glory and dream of Christmas will never depart. So Christmas will always be with us. As long as we study the act of giving presents so that they may fill some vacancy that the recipient has longed to see occupied. So it's basically saying, if you want the happiness and glory of Christmas to carry on, you've got to give the right present. You've got to give a present that somebody wants. So it's creating a kind of a social pressure. And often that pressure fell upon women, because women were the people who tended to have to take responsibility for buying presents. And maybe not a lot has changed there. So undoubtedly, it's a commercial festival. And if you open the newspapers, you will find endless adverts for Christmas presents going right back into probably the middle of November. But Christmas was also, of course, a religious festival. It was celebrating the birth of Christ. And religion encouraged charitable giving. It encouraged people to think about others. And all the Christmas stories, you know, whether we're talking about Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol, whether we're talking about the story of Christ itself, of himself, it's about encouraging people to think about others. And here's a couple of things that maybe illustrate that. The first one is from Vote, which was a feminist magazine encouraging women to vote and to campaign for women's rights. And it's pointing to the fact that Indian women in London have had a collection and provided a tree for 100 poor children in one settlement. A settlement was not quite an orphanage, but it was a place where kind of middle classes and working classes tried to make connections, where people went out into the community to help the poor. But maybe what's interesting here is it's a reminder of how the history of diversity is nothing new. Here's a group of Indian women collecting for poor children. And on the right, it's reporting that in Blackpool, a vicar has put a Christmas tree in a church. And at one level, this might be seen as a bit sacrilegious, merging secular traditions and Christian traditions. But what he's arguing is that this is important to bring children into the church. And that he's worried that in 1921, at a time of poverty, a time of rapidly rising unemployment, there are children who won't believe that Santa Claus is real because they haven't been given a present. And if they don't believe Santa Claus is real, maybe they won't believe Jesus is real. And that's what he's saying, that it's important to bring children into the Christian tradition and the Christian faith. And he's using a Christmas tree to do that. So it's a commercial festival, but it's also a charitable festival, a religious festival. And so many of the things we do today were around then. It was a family festival. It was a time for people to come together, to connect with their neighbours, to connect with their family. And this little article here, which is from the Nottingham Journal, says, you know, the greatest fun of Christmas preparation is hanging up the holly, fun in which the children, of course, are eager to share. You know, and it's trying to encourage you to not just decorate the house, but to do it with other people, and to use these decorations as something to give a little bit of brightness and a little bit of cheer to people's lives, but also as something you can share. And Christmas was about sharing. Even in these progressive old days, old Christmas customs are never forgotten, and into the simplest home, a sprig of holly finds its way at Yuletide. So some of the decorations are quite simple. You know, sprig of holly behind the picture frame. But again, there's a sense, and it's trying to communicate a sense that by by decorating your house at Christmas, by celebrating Christmas, you are connecting with the past. You're connecting with your family history, your personal history, your community history, but also a national history, a global history through Christianity. So traditions have a function behind them, but they're also emerging. And the Christmas tree was not well established in most homes in 1921. Christmas trees had been common in middle-class homes since the late Victorian period in Britain. But actually, having a Christmas tree requires space, and cramped working-class homes didn't have that. You'd have to buy it, whereas you could just go and cut some holly or get some old paper and cut it up, turn it into paper chains. But a tree costs money. So actually, in working-class homes between the wars, they're still relatively uncommon. And this article is encouraging people to have a tree. It's not taken as a norm. It's not taken as a cert that everybody will have one. It says, if there are young people in the house, there will surely be a Christmas tree. It's worthwhile paying a little extra to get a real spruce or a fir tree, as these are so much more effective in every way than the small pines that are often used as substitutes. And if you notice in the picture, they're two Christmas trees, but they're actually quite small, just the size of a fireplace. So it's suggesting that it's only families with children who have Christmas trees, but it's saying everybody should take part in this lovely tradition. So traditions are still evolving. They're still establishing themselves. And as I said, Christmas links past and present. And when when we think about the traditions we celebrate, we often consciously carry on the traditions of our childhood. And maybe even our grandparents. And when we don't do things that we did as a child, we're almost like deliberately rejecting something. And when a new family is formed, when people get married, when people move in with each other, they often work out their own ways of celebrating Christmas, merging two family traditions. And again, they're establishing an identity for themselves. So Christmas is a time of reflection, a time of contemplation. It's about connecting the past and the present. And here an advert actually tries to make use of that idea. This is from the Nottingham Journal again. It's advertising a toy shop, and it says, when we were boys, we bought our toys at Bearcroft's. Now we are men, we'll go again to Bearcroft's. Again, do what you did as a child. Link the past and the present.
Love that.
And there you can see Santa, and Santa is a relatively well-established figure by this time, and advertising is really key to spreading his popularity. Even if they're in slightly smudged black and white pictures like this. But there's also a real sense that Christmas is changing, and everything we moan about Christmas today is too commercial. It's not as religious as it used to be. We spend too much money on it. It's too stressful. Pretty much every Christmas complaint you can date back to the Victorian period. Everything we complain about Christmas is not really new in the sense. So people have a constant sense that Christmas is changing. And here's a couple of examples of that. The first one from the Irish Society, and it's just simply pointing out that pantomimes are changing. And it's not criticizing them, but it is saying the Christmas pantomime appears to be losing its old enduring attraction for the playgoer. The tendency appears to be for children's plays to take the place of the old-fashioned topsy-turvy musical comedy. And in the Victorian period, the pantomime was often foolhardy. It was about jokes. It was quite adult in many ways. And increasingly, it's becoming aimed at children. And it's saying, well, let's not be too complacent about this. Let's not moan about it too much, because as the article finishes, for the little folk, children's plays are both suitable and amusing. And it's almost telling adults, don't complain pantomimes aren't as good as they used to be, because kids still actually like them. And here's another cartoon, and I cheated slightly on this one because it's actually from 1920, not 1921. But it's from the Daily Mirror. And it's complaining about the commercialism of Christmas. And you can see in the top picture where it says, preparing for Christmas in a bygone time. And there's a lady and a gentleman dressed in Victorian garb. And they're choosing what to give their children. And what it says, because it's probably not very clear, is, what about a drum for George, a box of soldiers for Tom, a hoop for Harry, and a doll for Ethel, a Noah's Ark for Maud, and a book for Lucy? Small presents, nothing too ostentatious, but the parents are choosing them. That's how it was in the old days, before Christmas got commercialized. Today, 1920, this modern time, it's the kids making a list. And look how long their list is. You know, there's pages of it all across the floor. And the girl is saying, how's your list getting on? I've just got to gramophone and pedigree peaky. I'm jolly well going to make daddy give me a bicycle and a model steam yacht. Don't forget a note about stalls at theatres being no good. Must be boxes. So complaints, children are spoiled. There we indulge them too much. We spend too much money on Christmas. All the complaints that we have that Christmas is changing and getting worse, you could find them there in 1921. But of course, as I said, 1921 is also a period of real poverty. You know, it's a period before the welfare state. It's a period of rapidly rising unemployment as the economy struggles to readjust after the First World War. And across the newspapers, you'll find stories about Christmas and poverty. And what they're trying to say is they're trying to prick people's consciences, and they're telling the stories of it. So in Poverty Street, and that's a story about Christmas in the workhouse. And there's another one here, how an ex-officer spent his time, poverty and misery. And that's about a lodging house for men who are homeless. And note it's stressing he's a former soldier. We're letting down the troops. So some people undoubtedly suffered through poverty. For the very poorest in society, Christmas was actually sometimes a slightly better day than the rest of the year, because they would benefit from some charity. So the workhouse, you'd get better food. You might get a glass of beer. You'd actually be indulged. In prison, you'd get better food on Christmas Day. But if you weren't in the workhouse, you weren't able to draw upon other people's charities, it could be a terrible time. And of course, some people had to work. And here's a discussion how in Blackpool, the trams have decided they're not going to run in the morning because they don't want people to have to come into work. And the tram service is going to start at 2 p.m. in order for people to be able to spend Christmas morning and Christmas lunch with their family. But people are working. And the shops were sometimes open on Christmas morning. People don't have fridges. People don't have means of storing food. So sometimes small shops opened on Christmas morning in order to be able to, for people to pick their groceries. But in 1921, that didn't happen, because in 1921, Christmas fell on a Sunday. And that created arguments amongst shopkeepers, because normally the shops are shut for most of Christmas Day, and they're shut on Boxing Day. And that meant you got 2 days off. But if Christmas Day falls on a Sunday, the shop would have been shut anyway. So you're losing one of your 2 days off. So there was political campaigning in 1921 for Tuesday the 27th to be made a bank holiday. And for the very first time, the government agrees to that. So there are 2 bank holidays, Monday and Tuesday in 1921, to ensure people got 2 days off in addition to the weekend that they normally would have done. The war is also, of course, there. I won't read this article out, but it's kind of commenting upon, the shadow of war is starting to recede slightly, that, we're moving on. It says the terrible ordeal of war is less apparent this year than it has been in previous Christmases. So time is starting to put a barrier between the war and the present. But of course, Christmas is a time of family. It's a time of reflection. And if you had lost someone, if your son hadn't come back, your brother hadn't come back from the war, then Christmas was a time that reflected it, that reminded you of that their absence, your grief became very prominent. And Christmas is often a very sad time. But it's also a time of hope, because you're looking forward for some people. And this article is commenting upon the fact that there seems to be peace emerging in Ireland finally, that some of the strikes of 1921, there have been a lot of strikes in 1921, are settling down. And it's hoping that there will be peace and stability in the future. And it says, not until there is peace in this world can we really kind of celebrate Christ. And it's linking politics and religion. But I'll finish off with just a very different way of looking at Christmas. This is from the 1939 National Register. And this is in Llandelo in West Wales. And what we have here is a young man called Christmas J. Evans, who was born on the 19th of December, 1921. So someone born very close to Christmas. So what does his family decide to call him? Christmas. It was relatively unusual to name people Christmas if they were born at Christmas time, but there are a few hundred people around in the 1939 National Register called Christmas. And maybe that's a mark of how it was a special you know, it was a special day. And even right up to the present day, if you're born in December, if you have a girl born in December, Holly is a relatively popular name, whereas it's not for girls born in other days, in other months of the year. So I hope that's given you a bit of flavour of what Christmas was like in 1921.
It's just amazing. I mean, I don't know if anybody listening and watching feels the same as me right now, but I'm picturing at the moment people like my great-grandfather, who was born in 1904. I'm picturing he would have been three-year-old grandfather born in 1918. And these would have, I mean, okay, not everybody would have experienced everything that you've just gone through, but they would have at least experienced some of it. And I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to flick back through the slides a little bit, because I had some thoughts as we were going through. Let's see if I can actually remember my thoughts, because sometimes if I don't say them, they just fall out of my head. Let me just flip through here. I think what you said about the fact that with so many of these aspects, they're nothing new. Like the complaints about Christmas being commercialized today, that was being talked about this time 100 years ago, and I just think that's incredible. The fact that there was a focus on charity, there's still that as well. Even in Findmypast today, we're actually being encouraged to donate. I can't remember the name of the charity. I did donate. I can't remember the name of the charity. That's awful. But we're being encouraged to do that. It's a time for giving, a time for sharing. The fact that, you know, Christmas trees we're still not the norm in most households. And actually, when I think about it, who had the disposable income to go out and buy a tree that is not going to necessarily have any function? Does that make sense? Like, not everybody would have that option.
Yeah, I mean, the expense really holds back, and there's a clear class divide in how people celebrated Christmas. You know, whether that's food, whether that's presents, whether that's decorations, you know, things cost money. But working class families did save up for Christmas. There were savings clubs, often sometimes based in a local shop or a local pub, where you know, when you went into the shop on a weekly basis, you might put your small change into the savings club, and people would save up for Christmas for 6 months. And often what working class wives said, I mean, in the slightly later than 1921, in the 1930s, there was a social research organization called Mass Observation that actually went and asked people how they celebrated Christmas. And it was told by housewives in Bolton that they loved Christmas because they had choices. They'd been saving up for it for 6 months a year, and they could go into a shop and not worry too much about the money because they knew they had money in their purse. And they didn't have to buy the cheapest. They could buy what they wanted. And they enjoyed consumerism because they were denied that opportunity the rest of the year round by the real poverty and inequality that existed in society.
And I suppose I always remember seeing those adverts on TV about these saving schemes. I see them now. I saw them as a child. And again, as you just said, that's nothing new. That was still in place so people could have the financial backing, I suppose, the funding to actually have the Christmas they want and actually treat themselves a little bit. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there were always limits to how far it could go, and you know, the absence of the Christmas tree in many homes is an example of that. But certainly, people spent more at Christmas than they did the rest of the year round.
Yeah, and I had to talk about this with the pantomimes because I'm a huge pantomime lover. I have been in many pantomimes in the past when I was at school and when I was at university. And I hope this is okay me saying this, everybody, but I don't know if anybody else who goes to pantomimes remembers that particular one that they went to that one year where they got the adult humour for the first time. I remember that very, very vividly because my grandmother would always take us, my grandparents would take us to pantomimes, and my grandma has a very infectious laugh. She's got a cracking sense of humour, and she would just always howl out at the jokes. And when I was as a child, I'd be sitting near her watching this pantomime and going, "It's funny, but it's not that funny, Grandma, gosh." And then that one year, I must have been about 10 or 11, I think, and it just clicked. I was just like, that's why she's laughing. Oh, I do love a pantomime.
Yeah.
Yes, let me just flick through these. Yeah, in particular with the war as well. It must have been very similar when the Second World War ended as well. So many people that did not come home, and even for the people that did come home, they're changed forever. And I just hope that the people that did come home and they did, you know, they experienced Christmas in 1921, as you said, that hope that things will hopefully get better. I really hope that they felt that at Christmas. Yes, I can see lots of pantomime jokes in the comments, which I'm enjoying immensely. But yes, remember everybody, if you do have any questions for Martin, please do add them into the comments.
There's a couple there that have jumped out at me, sort of skimming through them quickly. Somebody, Victoria, asked about weddings over the Christmas.
Oh, let me find that comment and I'll bring it up on screen.
Victoria Whitwell.
Yeah, we love Victoria. There we go.
So Christmas weddings were a tradition in themselves in many ways, and that was partly about time, because most, and we're talking about England, someone's raised the question of Scotland, and I can talk about a little bit about that later on, because there's traditions and the way Christmas worked in Scotland was different in this period. But in England and Wales, most industries in the early 20th century are shutting down on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. So you have 2 days off from work. Now, you're not being paid for that, and that's a really important point to remember. So although the break from work is really nice, it meant losing income. So people were very reluctant to take a longer break because it would simply cost them money. And that wouldn't have been possible in many industries anyway. Simply, the employers wouldn't have let them. So Christmas Day weddings are really popular, partly because you know that you and a lot of your family are going to be able to have some time off. So everybody will be able to get to the wedding. And more importantly, you can have the next day off as well. Because it's Boxing Day. So Christmas Day weddings are popular for that reason, and especially in 1921, the Monday and the Tuesday are bank holidays as well, so there's a chance for a longer period. I've got to admit, I didn't look very closely for weddings in 1921. I suspect there were fewer than normal because there was a longer break on Christmas Day, because of the bank holidays being on the Monday and the Tuesday as well. So I think that probably would have created less demand for a wedding on Christmas Day itself. And of course, you could also maybe get married on Christmas Eve, because that was a Saturday. And it's quite unusual in some ways to get married on a Sunday anyway. Yeah. So I suspect in 1921, they were less popular than normal, though I haven't checked. But certainly in the 1920s, Christmas weddings are very popular. And that's really about because that you have 2 days off, and therefore, you can have a little bit of a break that you were going to have anyway, and it's not costing you extra money of taking extra time off work.
And if you're interested, everybody, we do actually have a blog post on Christmas Day weddings, which I'm hoping Jessie will find and pop into the comments for you all. In addition, I should also mention, I really should have mentioned this at the start. I'm really, really sorry. Martin's actually written a book about the history of Christmas in modern Britain, and I did give Jessie the link earlier, so she should be popping it in the comments as well. I don't know whether you'd like a couple of minutes just to talk about your book.
Well, like I said, it's about trying to look at how Christmas has been shaped by the society that it exists in, and how Christmas is a product of who we are. I mean, maybe a good way of example of showing that is the argument over commercialism. As I said, even in the Victorian period, you will find people complaining that Christmas has become too commercial, that there's too much advertising, that the shops are pushing it, that the Christian message is being pushed out of it by commercialism. That cartoon I showed, that from 1920, again, that's not just about children, that's also about spending. And those complaints, carry right up to the present day. So when we complain about Christmas being commercial, it's nothing new. However, there is something in those complaints, because Christmas has become more commercial. There is more spending on Christmas now than there was in the past. There is more advertising of Christmas. It has a higher profile. But what I'd argue is that's not about Christmas. That's about society. We live in a society which is more consumerist than it was in the past. There's higher advertising, higher disposable incomes. We spend more money on pretty much everything than we did 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So when we're complaining Christmas has become more commercial, it's actually just a reflection of our unease about commercialism and consumerism, full stop. But we complain about Christmas because Christmas is something special to us. We don't complain that the summer holidays become more commercial, but there's more advertising. We spend more on our holidays. They become bigger deals, but we don't complain about that because it doesn't have quite the same kind of hold on our emotions and our imagination that Christmas does. So by studying Christmas and how Christmas has changed, you can see elements of how society has changed. Someone else mentioned in the chat, Daphne, I remember as a child in the 40s and 50s, the candles on trees were actually lit. It gives me shudders just thinking about it.
Me too.
And she's dead right. Before electrical lights, it was very common to put candles on your trees. And sometimes they did catch fire. And we're talking about trees that weren't treated in the way that modern trees are treated against fire. The dripping wax. Christmas fires were actually relatively common. And what that meant was that you only tended to light the candles for a little bit, also because candles were expensive. So you might, on Christmas Eve, and putting up Christmas trees on Christmas Eve was probably the most common day for it. You'd make a big event of it because you've got to light each one individually. It's not flicking an electric switch. But Christmas trees, Christmas candles going out of fashion is an example of our traditions change. They move with the times. It simply was dangerous. And we haven't held on to this Victorian practice because it doesn't fit with our modern safety needs. Similarly, that was one of my favorite Victorian Christmas traditions was a game called Snapdragon, where you've got a bowl of.
I love Snapdragon.
You got a bowl. Well, maybe not the Victorian version.
Okay, maybe not the Victorian version.
The Victorian version was you got a bowl of brandy, and you lit it, and brandy burns, and then you drop some raisins in it, and you try and get the raisins out with your mouth. So you kind of plunge it into a slightly burning hot bowl of brandy.
This is what I love. Like everybody's talking about the traditions they keep to and why maybe they've had to tweak traditions a little bit. For example, I can't remember who said this now. Somebody said their husband is going to be having brain surgery around Christmas. I'm hoping you can maybe celebrate on a different day. I worked Christmas days for many, many years because I was a waitress, and so did my sister. So we actually used to have my family. We always used to have Christmas on Christmas Eve, actually, and then Christmas Day was most of us were working. So I think it's great that we all adapt to make not necessarily making the day what we want and the holiday what we want, but also what we need as well. Like, so it suits us.
And that's why Christmas has been such a successful festival, why it's lasted, because there aren't rules. You don't have to have turkey if you don't want to. You don't have to put up a Christmas tree if you don't want to. You can ignore it, but also you can adapt it to your tastes. People are talking about artificial trees in the chat, and artificial trees is a good example of how Christmas can become fashionable in certain ways. So, you do find artificial trees between the wars, but they probably start to become particularly common in the 1950s and the 1960s when they seemed modern because they were bright and they weren't green. They could be red, they could be blue, and because they're plastic, and plastic was a modern material. So by having an artificial tree, you were saying, I'm a modern family. But then, as they start to become popular, they also start to become seen as a little bit common in some people's eyes. So traditional trees can become back in fashion because you're rejecting modern fashion. And you're going back to what you see as something very traditional. And some people very deliberately did that. So some people love gaudy decorations because they feel the kind of the chaos and the color of it is who they are. Some people want something more tasteful, more tactful, because they feel that says something about them. So I think whether it's subconscious or not, we use Christmas almost as a way of saying something about who we are and showing it to the world. And sometimes we literally show it to the world. You know, in winter, we close our curtains because it's cold. But on Christmas, we often leave our curtains open so all the passers-by can see our lit Christmas tree. You know, it's sharing the joy, but it's also kind of, look at me, I think.
And now with, the rise of social media as well, everybody takes pictures of their decorations and the treats that they're making and the food, and we can just all share in the joy. Now, I do have a very particular question for you, but before I ask that, I have a question from Ingrid. Where did the tradition of Boxing Day come from?
Well, again, there are some religious roots to it. Kind of, is it St. Stephen's Day? But the word boxing, it's nothing to do with the sport. It's from the idea of a Christmas box, and a Christmas box is something. Well, there were two types of Christmas boxes. There were Christmas boxes which you gave to the poor, and sometimes they are literally a box, but sometimes they're there's something in church. And when you're in church on Christmas Day, you put money into the church. You put money into the box on Christmas Day at the service, and then the next day it will be distributed to the local poor. So that's one tradition. But the other tradition of a Christmas box is something that you give to people who have done you a service during the year. And that might be the grocer, it might be the delivery boy. In later years, it became the binman. And the Christmas box, again, it's using that phrase to describe giving a present to someone else. But the original idea of it being Boxing Day is this almost this obligation on people with resources to be charitable at Christmas time. So you might put some money into a box at the Christmas service, and the next day it will be distributed to the poor. That's normally the accepted idea of where this came from. But to be honest, proving where any of these traditions came from involves a great deal of speculation, because they emerge slowly and people kind of argue and debate where these ideas are from. In the Victorian period, you will find debates in newspapers saying, why do we do this? Where did this tradition come from?
I can imagine. And I wonder if it was, would this have been, for example, if I was an employer and I had, say, 5-10 people working for me, would I give them a Christmas box?
You might. Christmas bonuses are relatively common in this era, the start of the 20th century at work. You might also works parties. I mean, Christmas parties, office parties are in the news at the moment. They're not a new tradition. You will find them in this period. And often, they are ways of rewarding employees. But in an era when actually, there's a labour surplus, as there was in the early 1920s, there's a lot less emphasis on employee welfare. So it does happen, but it's maybe not standard that everybody would get a Christmas bonus. Servants were an interesting one, because this is an era when lots of middle-class families have servants. And there was a sense that you kind of have to give your servants a present and a treat at Christmas, because servants have although they are your servants, they also have a degree of control over your life, because they're doing your cooking, they're doing your cleaning, they're in your home. And if you have a bad servant, then it can upset your life. And good servants were sometimes hard to find. So often you find a kind of a debate at Christmas, how much should you spend on your servant? What should you give them? Because you don't want to indulge them, but at the same time, you don't want to be too parsimonious. And especially in big houses where you might not have very much connection with the servants, some people talk about how they hated the moment on Christmas when they had to go to the servants' quarters and give them a present, and it was all a bit awkward. But for small, and it's important to remember that even kind of relatively modest middle-class families might have one servant, a maid, and then there's a question of what do you do with them on Christmas Day? Do they cook you the dinner, but then they can't see their family? Do you actually want them around, and isn't it a bit awkward having them around on Christmas Day? So some people gave their servants Christmas Day off, and it might be the only day of the year where they actually cook themselves, or they might prepare the meal and then disappear home at lunchtime. But just as in today, on the internet, we have problem pages. There are debates about, how we should live and what's the right thing to do. you'll find these things in kind of all kinds of newspapers and middle-class magazines from this era. How to deal with the servants at Christmas for the affluent was one of the kind of things that people worried about and debated.
Oh dear for them. Yes, great question, Ingrid. Thank you for that, because I've often wondered about that myself. But the question I had for you, and this is one that has bugged me for many, many a year. I don't know if anybody else was the same, but I went to a Catholic school, and every year we used to get given oranges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was something to, like, for some reason we got an orange, but we also had an orange with Advent candles in. And then I don't really know, can't really remember, but where did the orange come from?
Well, Christmas, you're meant to have a treat. And oranges were relatively expensive. You know, when you're importing them and, you know, you don't have good refrigerated shipping, it's actually quite difficult to import fruit and to keep it fresh. It was possible. You know, there were oranges and bananas in Britain, but it was difficult. And that meant they were relatively expensive. Not so expensive that a working class family would not be able to afford the odd orange at Christmas. So it's a treat, but it's a treat that's within the occasional financial reach. So giving a child an orange at the bottom of their stocking, I think is, you know, it's a treat. That's essentially what it is. And then it becomes established. And today, when oranges are very affordable, we still do it. You know, we still put an orange in a kid's stocking, not because it's a treat, but because somehow that's what you do. It's like little chocolate coins.
Really sweet. Yeah.
You know, you used to give kids money, but, you know, giving them a penny now or giving them a coin isn't quite the same thing. So, you know, that has emerged, that has evolved into chocolate coins.
And where did actually Matthew's just mentioned this? He says he's losing internet connection, but oh no, hold on, that was the wrong one. Sorry, Angie's question. She says she used to get a lump of coal. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so that's again relatively common. I think it's more common in the north of England. I don't know where Angie grew up, but coal was about luck. It was a symbol of luck, because what is the idea of giving coal in the stocking has become one of the kind of a cliche of, we were so poor, we got a lump of coal in our stocking. But actually it was meant to be a symbol of luck, because you burn coal and coal gives you warmth. It keeps your house warm. So by giving someone a lump of coal, it's meant to be a symbol of warmth and love and luck. Coal was seen as lucky.
I'm really sad that nowadays it's more referred to if you've been bad. You get coal if you've been bad. I'm really sad that it doesn't have the same meaning anymore.
Yeah, you know, these things evolve and they change, and the original meanings sometimes get lost, and, you know, it gets lost in time.
Especially for some, I'm sure many of us have mining ancestors, but I just think that's really sad, and I never knew that until this exact moment, that was where that came from. That was the original meaning behind it. And as I said, I'm just very, very sad that doesn't exist anymore, that meaning. We're getting so many fantastic comments in here, actually. I've got to pin some out here. So Anya says, we had tights rather than a stocking, with a satsuma in one leg and an apple in another, and tubes of sweets and other wee goodies. Love sweets at Christmas. I don't eat sweets. I'm more of a chocolate girl, but at Christmas, sweets are like, yes, please. Oh, let's have a look here. Victoria says, having had the pleasure of enjoying Christmas in different countries with either family or friends, I enjoy how others celebrate in their individual ways. Discovering other traditions and festive dishes are what I love, and mixing things up is so fun, and it brings back great memories. Absolutely.
I think that sums up Christmas. You know, it's doing it your own way, drawing upon traditions, but adapting them to what works for you, connecting with the past, bringing back memories, and having fun. And that's what Christmas is about. And that's why, you know, it's got a sociological function, if I can sound pretentious. And its sociological function is, in a world where life is tough and demanding and stressful, a day of being a little bit silly, a day of being with the people that you love, you know, and the day of having a bit of fun can be really important. But of course, the sadness is for those people without family, for those people who have lost, for those people without the financial resources to, to have a bit of a party, then it's almost worse being poor at Christmas or being alone at Christmas than it is the rest of the year round. So it's a fantastic time for the majority, but for a minority, and it's always important to remember that, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure many people will think something similar, but when I was 16, I lost my father to cancer, and it was a month before Christmas. And I just remember that Christmas was awful, but it was also really special because it was the Christmas that we really connected with my mum's brother's family. Although we'd been close, we'd never been that close, and they took such good care of us during that time. And we're still very, very close to this day, actually. And yeah, and like last year, for example, the fact that Christmas got cancelled so close to the wire, didn't it? And, we were all told that we couldn't travel. And I remember ringing my mum last year and saying, we can't come to Wales for Christmas. I'm really, really sorry. And she burst into tears. I was really sad. But then myself and my fiance, we decided, this is the first Christmas we're going to be spending just the two of us. We've always gone to his family or my family, and we made our own day. We made it what we wanted. We could eat what we wanted. We could watch what we wanted. We could put the music on that we wanted, and it was actually lovely. It was I would have loved to have spent it with family, but it was a really, really lovely day. Actually, really, really lovely.
So, because I think last year reminded me a lot of the Second World War, obviously not personally, but as a historian, because in the Second World War, people were saying, it's such a shame, there isn't the food around, there aren't the presents around, there are limits on how far we can travel and things like that. And people were feeling, there was almost like a pressure on them to have a good Christmas during the war, but it couldn't be like that. And Mass Observation, this social research organisation, found that lots of people were feeling more stressed than normal about Christmas during the Second World War. But then afterwards, when you look at people's diaries from the Second World War, they're often saying, but actually the day itself was really nice because it was just relaxing. We didn't have to worry about cooking a massive, huge, complicated meal because we just didn't have that much food. We didn't have a load of alcohol, so we really enjoyed the one glass that we could have. For people who were Christian, they were saying that they felt that somehow the Christian message had come more important in the Christmas during the Second World War. So, sometimes, difficult circumstances can kind of focus our mind slightly on, on the small things. Sometimes that can be important.
I completely agree. I actually had a long list of traditions I wanted to chat about, and because we've had such a fantastic discussion already, we haven't got to most of them. I did have Boxing Day on my list. We've talked about that. We've talked about the oranges. That was very important for me to talk about the oranges. What else have I got here? Let's talk about food. So the sort of things we associate with Christmas today are things like, I don't know, Baileys and a Christmas roast and Yule log and Christmas pudding and Christmas cake. Has this always been the case, or is this something that's developed over the last 100 years?
A big meal has always been the case. I mean, even if you go right back to the origins of Christmas and any winter festival, it's about food partly. Why do we have, and why does most cultures have winter festivals? Winter is cold, it's dark. In early modern times, it's dangerous as well. And it's also difficult to feed your animals over the winter because the grass isn't growing. And what happens in many cultures is that there's a cull of livestock during the winter because you simply can't keep all your animals alive because you haven't got the food. So if you've culled the livestock because you can't keep them alive, suddenly for a brief period, you've got a lot of meat. So actually a feast, a winter feast, is quite common in lots of different cultures, and Christmas is an evolution of that. But also in the dark of winter, you want a bit of light and a bit of warmth. So having a Christmas party is part of that as well. So a big feast, that's true of Christmas going right back, 2000 years. What we eat has evolved. And it's partly about what you can get hold of. Turkeys, you can find people eating turkeys in the 18th century. In the 19th century, that's when it's really established as a Christmas dish. And you've got to remember, turkeys aren't native to Britain. They're brought in from America, so they don't have a very long history here. In Christmas Carol, there's a scene where he buys a big turkey, where Scrooge buys a big turkey for Tiny Tim and Tiny Tim's family. And again, I think that popularized the idea of turkey. It's partly because it's not a bird, a meat that you eat the rest of the year round very often. So again, it gives it a slightly kind of different, special feel. It's also because actually you can grow a very big turkey. And what that means is that there's a lot of meat on it. So if you are having a big family gathering, one joint, one bird can actually serve quite a lot of people. So there's a practical reason for it as well. The turkeys were expensive. And certainly, say in 1921, certainly amongst the working class, it would have been more common to have pork or beef, any roast meat really. In many ways, whatever people could find that was at an affordable price. Turkey in this era, in the start of the 20th century, is quite a middle class thing in some ways. It's in the 1950s that turkey becomes really common as the standard dish wherever you are. But as soon as something becomes standard, then other people going, I'm not going to go with the tradition, I'm going to be a bit different. And they might start having goose or beef and something as almost as a way of, saying they're different. So a big meal, definitely, that's a very, very old tradition. The exact things we eat, they emerge, and they emerge sometimes from curious places. So the Yule log, for example, when we think of a Yule log now, I'm assuming you're meaning like a chocolate log.
Yeah. Yes.
But the Yule log originally is literally a log. It's a piece of wood.
Of course
and you put it on the fire on Christmas Eve, and you keep it burning. And it's meant to be a big log, and it's meant to try and burn through the night. And if it can burn through the night and be still going on Christmas Day, it's a sign of luck. And this was
warm as well.
Yeah, and this was a tradition that you get a big log and you put it on the fire and you try and keep it going as a sign of luck. Not everyone could do this because you need a big fireplace for a big log. You need access to wood, of course, as well. So the Yule log as a food is a way that an older tradition has carried on, but it's lost its associations with luck, which is what it was really about, and it's become about enjoying yourself. Rosie's Morales put a great comment in the comment about when her mum was a child in the 1920s. She wrote about going shopping for Woolworths for her presents for family, and the family coming for the luxury meats and trifles, etc., and the postman delivering parcels on Christmas Day. Woolworths is really important in the history of Christmas. Woolworths really takes off in the 1930s as a big department store, and it was cheap, and it gave people access to little trinkets, little presents, different kinds of things that they might not be able to get normally. And it really sells the idea of Christmas, and people, going to Woolworths to buy your Christmas treats, to buy some small presents, to buy some decorations. Lots of people talk about that in their diaries from the 1930s. So Woolworths is really important in selling it. And the postman's important as well. As Rosie is quite right, the post came on Christmas Day until really quite late. I think it's still happening in the 1950s. Because everybody sent a Christmas card. There's no phones for most people. There's certainly no social media. So sending a Christmas card isn't just a way of connecting with people. It's also a way of maybe, writing them a letter, connecting with people you haven't seen for a while. So this Christmas post is huge. The post office struggle to deal with it every year. And if you didn't deliver cards on Christmas morning, you might not get through everything. But lots of people remember, certainly before the Second World War, the arrival of the Christmas Day post is a really kind of special thing. And the post office has got a problem here, because the post office every year is saying post early, post early, post early. And it's running publicity campaigns because it doesn't want to have this massive bunch of cards and presents to deliver on Christmas morning, because the postmen don't like working Christmas morning. But families are often saying, oh, it's so special. All the presents and the cards arrive on Christmas morning. So people often leave it very late. So it's again, there's another kind of tension there. And in the end, the post office just stops delivering on Christmas morning. But it's
It's
another.
funny. It's funny you should mention about the adverts for post early. I saw National Archives shared a post about that earlier on, and it was a cute little animation that they put out in, like, I can't remember the exact year. It must have been about 70 or 80 years ago or something like that. A cute little animation to get people to post in good time before Christmas. That's nothing new either.
And now Christmas cards are fading. You know, they're a tradition. They're an example of tradition that is falling away, because in a world where you can see what your friends and relatives are doing just by logging into Facebook, you can see what they're eating almost every day. You know, you don't necessarily need the Christmas card to connect with people, because social media keeps us connected all the time. Christmas cards may come back into fashion, but the number sent has been slowly falling away for the last kind of 20 odd years.
Yeah, a lot of people talking about Christmas films in the comments. That's another thing, isn't it? Christmas films. Going straight to Muppets and Home Alone. And it's interesting because there's a new series out. It's a new Hawkeye series. It's a Disney Marvel one. And I saw some discussion about that being the fact that they've set it at Christmas. So there's 6 episodes, and it's all around Christmas. And there was some criticism about that. Like, did they have to do that? But I don't know. Christmas films are good fun, right?
Yeah, I mean, Christmas films are actually a relatively recent tradition, because who wants to watch a Christmas film in the summer?
Yeah.
But it was actually quite difficult in the early days of cinema to distribute films, because they're literally on reels of film. What tended to happen was the reel of film would go from town to town. So it would be on in Cardiff, and then it would go 5 miles down the road and 5 miles down the road. And that meant if you made a Christmas film, by the time it got to kind of the edges of the country, it's way past Christmas. It wasn't actually very practical to do. So Christmas films are relatively uncommon before the 1950s. My favorite Christmas film is A Miracle on 34th Street. You know, a real classic, the original version, and a film that was such a big commercial hit that it encouraged Hollywood to make more of those movies. And you know, that was a breakthrough. It's a Wonderful Life is a great film as well. Most of it, which isn't about Christmas at all, but the final scenes are set at Christmas, and it is a real tearjerker. Someone mentioned in the chat Muppets Christmas Carol, which again, I love that film, and it's actually in many ways very true to Dickens's original story. It's a really faithful reproduction of Dickens's story in many ways. So I think that's a classic. I've also got a soft spot for Elf, which is a bit of a silly film in many ways, but I think it's a really nice film.
Yes. Now we are a couple of minutes out, everybody. So if you do have one last question for Martin, please add it in the comments. But we've talked about so much today. Is there anything that we've not touched upon that you would like to talk about in particular?
Maybe it's not a historical point, but you know, I think we should value Christmas. I think Christmas has a real function for us as individuals, for us as communities. You know, we live in often a very difficult, divided world, and yet we have so much in common with each other. We have far more in common with each other than divides us. And Christmas is kind of part of that kind of complex web. It's a common story. It's something that we all know. And even if you hate Christmas, it's still part of our kind of shared inheritance. It's one of the things that turn us from individuals, you know, into communities. And I think that's really important. And it does encourage us to think of others. And sometimes it can feel stressful, and it can certainly feel expensive, and it can feel a hassle. And when the kids wake up at 4 a.m, you're cursing them. But, you know, it gives you memories, or that you know, people treasure for the rest of their lives, and it connects people. And we all know these stories. We all know these films, these songs, etc. They are something that we have in common. Even if we hate them, we know them. And I think that's really important. And it is an emotional time. And you know,
Getting me all emotional now.
Yeah. So, you know, at the end of Dickens's Christmas Carol, Scrooge's nephew says, "Christmas has done me good." I think he was right. Can be tough, but I think on the whole, there's a lot going for Christmas.
Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Okay, yes. I think that really wraps it up very nicely. I think your words and sentiments are beautiful, Martin, and it has been a really, really, not just a fun session, but also a fascinating discussion today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me about, as you said, something that in a way, whether you know it or expect it or not, Christmas connects us all. And I think the point about us making it what we want will mean that Christmas will keep evolving, traditions will keep changing as we try and adapt to the world that we live in, I think.
Yeah, it will, absolutely. There were some really great comments in the chat that I didn't see, sorry. But there are some fantastic comments there and memories and questions as well.
So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. A couple of housekeeping things from me before we wrap up. So Miko is on Friday's live duty tomorrow. I will be supporting him in the comments. And you will finally get the full story of, did I start that Twitter thread? Was this all my fault? If you don't know what I'm talking about, just join us tomorrow and we will explain everything. You'll get the full story, I promise you. Martin's book you can actually buy, and Jessie, if you could pop the link in the comments again, that would be lovely. And last but not least, some of you may remember last year we shared a Findmypast Christmas message. And I'm really pleased to say that this year we will be doing the same, because if the Queen can do a Christmas message, so can Findmypast. And this year is a little bit different. And I just want to leave that there and let you look forward to it on Christmas Day. So yes, thank you so much, Martin.
No problem, thanks.
And thank you everybody for joining. Take care of yourselves and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Happy Christmas.